Eric Mason considered himself a reasonably private person. He didn't snoop through his wife's phone, didn't question her late nights at the office, didn't worry when business trips ran long. Trust was the foundation of their 5-year marriage, or so he believed, which is why finding the hidden folder on Melissa's laptop was entirely accidental. It began with a printer issue, a simple technical problem on a routine Sunday afternoon. Eric's laptop was updating, and he needed to print some documents for work before Monday morning. "Can I borrow your laptop for a minute?" he called to Melissa, who was in the kitchen preparing dinner. "Mine's stuck in an update cycle." "Sure," she replied, her voice carrying a slight hesitation that Eric barely registered. "It's in my office. Password's the usual." Eric settled at Melissa's desk, logging in with the password they shared for various accounts, their anniversary followed by her birth year. Simple enough to remember, complex enough to satisfy basic security requirements. The document printed without issue, but as Eric moved to close the laptop, he noticed something unusual on the screen. A small notification in the corner indicated a backup in progress, backup to private 62% complete. It was the label that caught his attention. Private seemed an odd name for a backup drive. Their shared cloud storage was labeled Mason Family, and her work drive was clearly marked with her company's name, Meridian Consulting. Curiosity rather than suspicion prompted him to click on the notification. The backup paused, and a dialog box opened asking if he wanted to view the destination folder. Again, without any real thought beyond mild interest, he clicked yes. What appeared on screen stopped his breath. The folder contained dozens of subfolders with labels that made no sense in the context of his wife's life as he understood it. AM profiles, Tinder backups, hotel receipts, Greg messages, Kyle pics, and most disturbing of all, story versions. Eric sat motionless, his mind refusing to process the implications. This had to be some kind of mistake, perhaps files from a friend's computer that Melissa was helping with, or maybe research for a project he wasn't aware of. But as his cursor hovered over the folders, rational explanations evaporated. The preview thumbnails showing message threads with men he'd never heard of. Photo thumbnails displaying his wife in settings he didn't recognize, sometimes with men whose faces were partially visible. His hand shook slightly as he clicked on story versions. The folder contained Word documents with dates spanning the past 3 years. Each file name included a man's name and a location: Chicago Greg Story.docs, NYC Business Kyle.docs, Dave Hotel Explanation.docs. Eric opened the most recent file, dated just 2 weeks earlier. The document contained what appeared to be carefully crafted narratives, detailed explanations of business meetings, conferences, and late-night work emergencies. Each story included specific details, colleagues' names, hotel information, meeting agendas, even weather conditions. They were alibis, meticulously constructed, comprehensive alibis. His breath shallow now, Eric clicked on AM profiles. The folder opened to reveal screenshots of dating profiles from what he recognized as Ashley Madison, the notorious site for people seeking affairs. There was Melissa, his wife of 5 years, partner of 8, smiling in photos he'd never seen, using a slightly altered name but unmistakably her. "Finding what you need?" Melissa's voice from the doorway sent a jolt through Eric's body. He turned to find her leaning against the frame, her expression unnervingly calm. Words failed him as he gestured helplessly at the screen. Melissa sighed, entering the room fully and closing the door behind her. "I guess we need to talk." "Talk?" Eric finally found his voice, though it emerged strangled. "Melissa, what is all this?" She approached slowly, perching on the edge of the desk rather than taking a seat. "It's complicated." "Complicated," he repeated flatly. "There are," he glanced at the screen, "at least 5 different men's names here. Hotel receipts, dating profiles, documents labeled story versions. What exactly is complicated about that?" Melissa's composure slipped slightly, her shoulders tensing. "I didn't want you to find out this way." "Find out what?" "That my wife has been systematically cheating on me? That you've been creating elaborate alibis and storing them like research notes?" His voice rose with each question, disbelief transforming rapidly into anger. "Lower your voice," Melissa said sharply, glancing toward the closed door. "I can explain, but not if you're going to shout." The audacity of her concern about volume when confronted with evidence of serial infidelity struck Eric as absurd. A harsh laugh escaped him. "By all means, explain how this folder full of dating profiles and messages with men I've never heard of isn't exactly what it appears to be." Melissa straightened, switching tactics. "Fine. Yes, I've been seeing other people. It started about 3 years ago. Our marriage wasn't fulfilling certain needs, and rather than blow everything up, I found discrete outlets. Discrete outlets, Eric echoed, the clinical terminology making his stomach turn. You mean affairs? Multiple affairs that you've been meticulously documenting and hiding. I was careful, she said, as if that somehow mitigated the betrayal. It never affected us, our home, our finances. I kept everything completely separate. Eric stared at her, this woman he thought he knew intimately after 8 years together. Her reasoning was so alien to him that he struggled to process it. Never affected us? You've been lying to my face for 3 years, constructing elaborate stories, creating fake profiles. How can you possibly say it didn't affect us? Melissa sighed, her expression shifting to one of impatience, as if explaining something obvious to someone being deliberately obtuse. Because I never brought it home. I never let my feelings for you change. Our life together remained exactly as it was. Except it was built on a foundation of lies, Eric countered, his shock giving way to a cold clarity. Every time you said you were working late, every business trip, every overnight conference, I trusted you completely. Do you understand that? I defended you to friends who thought your schedule was suspicious. I told them you were dedicated, ambitious. A flicker of something, guilt? Annoyance, crossed Melissa's face. I am dedicated and ambitious. My career success is real. Sometimes the trips were legitimate business. Sometimes? Eric's voice cracked on the word. How generous of you to occasionally do what you actually said you were doing. Melissa's patience visibly thinned. Look, I understand you're upset. Finding out like this is unfortunate, but people have different needs in relationships. Monogamy is a social construct that doesn't work for everyone. The rehearsed quality of her response struck Eric forcefully. This wasn't a panicked explanation from someone caught unexpectedly. These were prepared talking points. If that's what you believe, why didn't you discuss it with me before our wedding? Before you made vows specifically promising fidelity? His voice remained steady now, almost detached, as shock crystallized into something harder. Why construct elaborate lies instead of proposing an open marriage? Melissa hesitated, and Eric saw the calculation behind her eyes, weighing responses, considering angles. It was an expression he recognized from her work presentations, but had never before seen directed at him during a personal conversation. I didn't think you'd understand or agree, she finally admitted. You've always been conventional in your views. Traditional, conventional, Eric repeated. Is that what we're calling basic honesty now? You didn't trust me enough to have a difficult conversation, so you decided that systematic deception was the better option? Melissa stood, her posture defensive. I made a choice to protect what we had while meeting my needs elsewhere. It wasn't ideal, but... Stop. Eric raised a hand, suddenly unable to bear another word. Just stop. Do you even hear yourself? You're rationalizing years of betrayal as some kind of noble sacrifice. A tense silence filled the room. Eric turned back to the computer screen, the folders still open, the evidence of his wife's double life displayed in neatly organized categories. How many? He asked quietly. How many what? Men. Affairs. However you want to classify them. Melissa crossed her arms. Does it matter? Would 3 be better than 7? Would one long-term arrangement be more acceptable than several shorter ones? Her deflection provided its own answer. Enough that she didn't want to specify a number. Eric nodded slowly, a strange calm settling over him. I'm going to pack some things and stay at a hotel tonight. I can't be in this house with you right now. Don't you think you're overreacting? Melissa's tone had shifted to one of patronizing concern. We should discuss this rationally, figure out a path forward. A path forward, Eric echoed, staring at her in disbelief. You've been leading a double life for most of our marriage, and your primary concern is that I'm not being rational enough in my response? He stood, closing the laptop more forcefully than necessary. I'm leaving for the night. Maybe longer. I need space to process all of this. He gestured vaguely at the computer. Melissa's expression hardened. Fine. Go cool off. But we need to talk about this like adults when you're ready. There are practical considerations, financial entanglements. We need to be smart about how we handle this situation. The coldly pragmatic response cemented something in Eric's mind. This woman, who had shared his bed and his name for 5 years, was a stranger to him. Her primary concern wasn't the pain she'd caused or the trust she'd shattered, but the practical logistics of damage control. I'll be in touch, he said simply, moving past her toward the door. Eric, she called as he reached the hallway. The backup drive. It's important for work. Please don't do anything with those files. He paused, her priorities striking him like a physical blow. After everything revealed in the past 20 minutes, her concern was for the evidence, not the relationship. Without responding, Eric walked to their bedroom and packed enough clothes for a few days, his movements mechanical. Melissa didn't follow him, presumably returning to the kitchen where dinner preparations remained half completed. As he carried his bag toward the front door, he passed the kitchen entrance. Melissa stood by the counter, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in hushed tones. She glanced up, making brief eye contact before turning away. She was already making calls. Damage control. Crisis management. Eric left without another word, the quiet click of the front door closing feeling strangely final. The hotel room was anonymous and sterile, exactly what he needed. Eric sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, uncertain who to call or what to say. How did one even begin to explain discovering that their entire marriage had been, at least partially, an elaborate facade? He opened his contacts, scrolling past names without seeing them. His closest friend, Mark, was an obvious choice for support, but the thought of articulating what he'd discovered felt impossible. His parents were out of the question. His mother had always harbored reservations about Melissa that Eric had defended against vigorously. The irony of that loyalty now felt like salt in an open wound. Instead of calling anyone, Eric opened his laptop and began methodically documenting what he'd found. Screenshots would have been ideal, but he hadn't thought to capture evidence before leaving. Still, he recorded everything he could remember: folder names, file dates, the men's names he'd seen, the structure of the alibis. The act of cataloging helped impose order on the chaos of his thoughts. Around midnight, his phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "I understand you need space tonight. When you're ready to talk, I think we can work through this. What we have doesn't need to be thrown away because of outside entanglements that never really touched our core relationship." The message's calculated reasonableness made Eric's jaw clench. She was framing her affairs as peripheral, unimportant sideshows that existed entirely separate from their real relationship, as if trust and honesty were optional extras rather than fundamental components. He didn't respond, setting his phone face down on the nightstand and attempting to sleep. Rest proved elusive, his mind replaying moments from their marriage with new context. Business trips that had seemed excessive but that he'd supported. Late-night work emergencies that had pulled her away from anniversaries and family events. The gradual reduction in their physical intimacy that she'd attributed to work stress and that he'd accepted with patient understanding. How much of their life together had been genuine? How much had been performance designed to maintain her comfortable home life while she sought excitement elsewhere? Morning brought no clarity, only a gritty exhaustion from too little sleep and too much thought. Eric showered and dressed mechanically, grateful that his work as a software project manager allowed remote options. The thought of maintaining professional composure in an office setting felt beyond his capabilities. He sent a brief message to his team letting them know he'd be working from his hotel room, citing a plumbing emergency at home, yet another lie in a situation already drowning in deception. The irony wasn't lost on him. His phone displayed multiple missed calls and texts from Melissa. He skimmed the messages without fully absorbing them, more rationalization, requests to talk, increasingly urgent as they went unanswered. The final text caught his attention. "I'll be at the office all day. Conference room presentation for the Henderson project at 2 p.m. Please don't make any hasty decisions before we can talk properly. M." The message's subtext was clear: "Don't disrupt my professional life with our personal problems." Something about this priority, her career concerns taking precedence over the devastating breach of trust, crystallized Eric's simmering anger into cold resolve. For 3 years, Melissa had maintained a careful separation between her various lives, compartmentalizing her marriage, her affairs, and her career into distinct, non-overlapping spheres. That separation had protected her, allowing her to be selective about which version of herself existed in which context. Her colleagues and clients knew only the polished, professional Melissa Mason, Director of Client Services at Meridian Consulting. They had no idea about the woman who crafted elaborate alibis and maintained dating profiles under slightly altered names. Eric stared at his phone, a plan forming in his mind that he would later recognize as the product of sleep deprivation and emotional trauma. In that moment, however, it felt like perfect justice, a dismantling of the carefully constructed walls between Melissa's compartmentalized lives. He knew her work email password. Like their shared computer password, it was a variation on personal information that she'd never bothered to change, confident in the boundaries she'd established between her different worlds. Eric opened his laptop and navigated to Meridian Consulting's webmail portal. He entered Melissa's credentials, unsurprised when they worked. Her inbox appeared, organized with the same methodical precision as everything else in her life. He composed a new email, addressed to Melissa herself. In the CC field, he added the company's HR director, whose email he remembered from previous conversations about benefits. The subject line was simple: files you might need for today's presentation. In the body, he wrote, "Melissa, I found these files on your laptop while trying to print a document. Since you mentioned today's important presentation, I thought you might need them. I'm still processing what I discovered. We can talk when you're ready, to be honest. Eric." His finger hovered over the send button as a moment of doubt surfaced. Was he crossing a line by involving her workplace? Was this vindictive rather than justified? Before he could reconsider, his phone buzzed with another text from Melissa. "Since you're not responding, I assume you're still processing. Take whatever time you need. I've told everyone you're dealing with a family emergency. We can keep this between us until we decide next steps." The presumption in her message, that his silence signified acceptance of her management of the situation, that he would naturally follow her lead in keeping this private, dissolved his hesitation. Melissa was still controlling the narrative, still dictating terms, still compartmentalizing. Eric returned to his laptop and clicked send. The email with its damning attachments departed into cyberspace, crossing boundaries that Melissa had maintained for years. In a single action, Eric had connected worlds she had kept deliberately separate, introducing her carefully hidden reality to a context where only her professional persona had previously existed. As the confirmation appeared on screen, a wave of conflicting emotions washed over him: vindication and regret, relief and uncertainty. He closed the laptop slowly, uncertain whether he had just taken the first step toward justice or merely lowered himself to a level of deception that mirrored what he despised in his wife. The answers would come soon enough. It was 11:47 a.m. In just over 2 hours, Melissa would be standing in front of colleagues and clients, unaware that the facade she had maintained so carefully for years was about to collapse completely. He hadn't just found a hidden folder on her laptop. He had found the key to who his wife really was, and now, for better or worse, everyone would know. Eric's phone began ringing at 2:17 p.m. He stared at the screen displaying Melissa's name, a strange calm settling over him as he imagined the scene unfolding at her office. The Henderson Project presentation would have been underway when the email arrived. Had she checked her phone during a break? Had someone interrupted to deliver the message? Or had she opened her laptop to find the notification waiting like a digital time bomb? He let the call go to voicemail. 17 seconds later, it rang again. Again, he didn't answer. By the third call, Eric switched his phone to silent mode, watching as Melissa's name appeared and disappeared from his screen in rapid succession. Text notifications began piling up alongside the missed calls. "What have you done? Call me immediately. You had no right. This is my career. Answer your damn phone." The escalating panic evident in her messages produced an emotion in Eric he didn't immediately recognize. It wasn't quite satisfaction, the situation was too tragic for that, but something adjacent to it. A grim vindication, perhaps. For once, Melissa wasn't controlling the narrative. His laptop pinged with an email notification. This one wasn't from Melissa but from Patricia Donnelly, Meridian Consulting's HR director. "Dear Mr. Mason, I'm writing to acknowledge receipt of your email to Melissa Mason and myself. Given the sensitive nature of the content, I've initiated our standard protocol for handling personal matters that intersect with workplace concerns. If you're amenable, I would appreciate a brief telephone conversation at your earliest convenience. My direct line is below. Regards, Patricia Donnelly, Director of Human Resources, Meridian Consulting Group." The professional, measured tone struck Eric as surreal in contrast with Melissa's frantic messages. He hadn't fully considered how HR might respond when he'd impulsively included Patricia in his email. Now he wondered what standard protocol entailed in a situation like this. Before he could decide whether to call Patricia, his phone lit up with another incoming call, this one from a number he didn't recognize. Assuming it might be Patricia calling from her direct line, he answered. "Hello? Is this Eric Mason?" The male voice was unfamiliar. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Kyle Brennan. You don't know me, but I think we need to talk." Eric's breath caught. "Kyle." One of the names from Melissa's folders. "How did you get my number?" he asked, buying time as his mind raced to process this unexpected development. "Your wife's phone. She's not in a state to make decisions right now. I thought I should reach out directly." "You're with her now?" Eric felt a strange disconnect, as if the conversation were happening to someone else. "Yes, at Meridian's offices. There's been a situation here. I assume you know why." I sent her an email, Eric confirmed, the admission feeling inadequate to describe what he'd actually done. With attachments, Kyle added, his tone carefully neutral. Those attachments have created some complications. I imagine they would, Eric replied, finding it difficult to summon sympathy. Why exactly are you calling me, Kyle? Aren't you one of the complications? A pause followed, then, fair point. Look, I'm not trying to insert myself into your marital issues. But there are some practical matters that need immediate attention. Melissa is indisposed. Her boss has suggested she take the rest of the day off, but she's not in a condition to drive. And you're what, offering to take her home? Eric couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. How chivalrous. I'm trying to handle this like an adult, Kyle replied, a hint of frustration breaking through his careful composure. We can have the larger conversation about who did what to whom later. Right now, there's a practical situation that needs addressing. Eric considered his options. Part of him wanted to tell Kyle to deal with the mess. After all, he'd been a willing participant in the deception. Another part recognized the absurdity of allowing one of his wife's affair partners to escort her home in the midst of this crisis. Put her boss on the phone, Eric said finally. What? Her supervisor. I want to speak with whoever's in charge there. After a brief silence, Kyle agreed. Hold on. Eric heard muffled conversation, then a new voice came on the line. Mr. Mason? This is James Whitaker, VP of Client Services. I understand we're dealing with a sensitive situation. That's one way to put it, Eric replied. I gather my wife isn't in a state to drive herself home? That's correct, James confirmed, his tone professionally detached. Given the circumstances, we think it's best if she takes some personal time. I've already spoken with Patricia in HR about arranging temporary coverage for her projects. I see, Eric said, processing the implication that Melissa's professional disruption was already in motion. I'm currently not at home due to this same situation. I'm staying at a hotel. Understood, James replied. In that case, would you prefer that we arrange transportation for Melissa to her residence, or perhaps to join you at your location? The question presented a decision Eric wasn't prepared to make. Did he want a confrontation now, with both of them raw and reactive? Or would separation actually give Melissa more time to construct yet another carefully crafted narrative? I'll come get her, he decided abruptly. I can be there in about 30 minutes. That seems appropriate, James agreed, sounding relieved to have a resolution. I'll let Patricia know. When you arrive, please check in at reception and someone will escort you up. After ending the call, Eric sat motionless for several minutes, absorbing the reality of what was happening. In the space of 24 hours, his life had completely unraveled. Now he was preparing to face not only his wife but also the public embarrassment of collecting her from her workplace after exposing her infidelity to her colleagues. The drive to Meridian Consulting's downtown offices passed in a blur. Eric found himself operating on autopilot, his mind strangely detached from his actions. He gave his name at reception, was issued a visitor badge, and followed a young woman through security doors to an elevator bank. Ms. Donnelly is expecting you, the receptionist explained as they ascended to the executive floor. She'll meet you in the conference room. Rather than the bustling professional environment he'd visited for company functions in the past, the office felt eerily quiet. The few employees visible at their desks seemed deliberately focused on their screens, carefully avoiding eye contact as he passed. Patricia Donnelly met him at the conference room door, her expression professionally neutral despite the circumstances. In her mid-50s with silver-streaked hair and wire-rimmed glasses, she projected the composed authority of someone who had handled delicate situations before. Mr. Mason, thank you for coming in. Please, have a seat. She gestured to the large conference table where a single figure sat with her back to the door. Melissa didn't turn as he entered, her posture rigid and defensive. A box of tissues sat on the table before her, several crumpled ones visible. Patricia closed the door quietly, taking a seat at the head of the table. I've offered Melissa 2 weeks of personal leave, effective immediately, Patricia began without preamble. Given the sensitive nature of materials shared within our corporate environment today, this seems the appropriate first step. Eric nodded, unsure what response was expected of him. I want to be clear, Patricia continued, that Meridian takes no position on personal matters between employees and their spouses. However, when those personal matters potentially impact our workplace culture or client relationships, we have protocols to follow. I understand, Eric said, though he wasn't entirely sure what protocols might exist for a situation like this. The Henderson presentation has been postponed, Patricia added, glancing briefly at Melissa, who remained silent. James Whitaker will oversee Melissa's accounts temporarily while we determine next steps. The careful, corporate language struck Eric as almost comically insufficient for addressing what had happened. His impulsive email had effectively upended Melissa's professional standing along with their marriage, yet here was Patricia discussing it as if it were a routine HR matter. Next steps meaning what, exactly? Eric asked. Patricia adjusted her glasses slightly. That will depend on several factors, including the extent to which today's disclosures may have impacted client relationships or violated any company policies. You're considering firing me, Melissa spoke for the first time, her voice hoarse but controlled. Let's not dance around it. No decisions have been made, Patricia corrected firmly. As I explained earlier, we need to conduct a thorough review before determining appropriate action. Eric glanced between them, realizing he was witnessing the professional consequences of his actions unfolding in real time. He had wanted to disrupt Melissa's carefully compartmentalized life, to force her to face the reality of her deceptions. Now, watching her career potentially crumbling alongside their marriage, he felt a complex mixture of vindication and regret. I'd like to take my wife home now, he said quietly, the word wife feeling strange on his tongue given everything that had transpired. Patricia nodded, rising from her chair. Of course. Melissa, please contact me tomorrow to discuss logistics for your leave period. And? She hesitated, professional detachment momentarily giving way to genuine concern. Take care of yourself. After Patricia left, the silence in the conference room became oppressive. Melissa finally turned to face Eric, her makeup smeared despite obvious attempts to repair it, her eyes red-rimmed but fiercely composed. I hope you're satisfied, she said, her voice low and controlled. You may have just destroyed my career. Interesting that your career is your first concern, Eric replied, the bitter observation escaping before he could filter it. What did you expect? That I'd be prioritizing our marriage after what you just did? Melissa gathered her belongings, movements precise despite her evident distress. You violated my privacy and professional boundaries in one move. That's not the action of someone interested in salvaging a relationship. And maintaining secret dating profiles while married is? Eric countered. Creating detailed alibi documents? Those are signs of someone invested in honest communication? Melissa stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced composure. We can continue this conversation elsewhere. I've been humiliated enough for one day. The drive home passed in tense silence. Eric had briefly considered returning to his hotel, but the practical need for additional clothing and personal items made stopping at the house necessary. Whether he would stay remained an open question. As he pulled into their driveway, Eric noticed a vehicle parked across the street, a dark sedan he didn't recognize. The significance didn't register until they were inside and Melissa was hanging her coat in the hallway closet with mechanical precision. That was Kyle's car, Eric realized aloud. He followed us here. Melissa paused, her back to him. Probably. He's worried about me. Worried, Eric repeated flatly. Your affair partner is worried about you, so he followed us home. Don't call him that, Melissa said sharply, turning to face him. And yes, unlike you, Kyle is concerned about my well-being rather than focused on punishment. The casual defense of a man who had participated in destroying their marriage pushed Eric past his breaking point. Get out. Excuse me? Get out of this house, Eric clarified, his voice deadly calm. Go to Kyle. Go anywhere. But I can't be in the same space with you right now. You can't throw me out of my own home, Melissa protested, indignation replacing her earlier composure. My name is on the deed. I have equal right to be here. Then I'll leave, Eric said, already turning toward the stairs. But first I'm going to collect some things. More than overnight supplies this time. Eric, wait. Melissa's tone shifted, the sharp edge giving way to something less certain. We need to talk about this rationally. What you did today was impulsive and destructive, but there are practical matters we need to address. The echo of her words from the previous night, her focus on practical matters rather than the emotional devastation, only reinforced his decision. I'm done talking for now. I need space and time to figure out what comes next. And my career? Melissa pressed. You've potentially destroyed everything I've worked for. Does that mean nothing to you? Eric paused on the stairs, turning back to look at her. I sent an email with attachments that you created. Documents and profiles you made, messages you sent. If your career is in jeopardy, it's because of your actions, not mine. You had no right. I had every right, Eric interrupted, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. You betrayed our marriage vows. You lied to my face for years. You constructed elaborate deceptions. All while I supported you, Defended you to friends who questioned your late nights and weekend emergencies. Melissa's expression hardened. So this was revenge. Pure and simple. No, Eric shook his head. It was consequence. You maintained these separate worlds for years, controlling exactly who knew what about you. That control was part of what enabled the deception to continue. I simply connected worlds you'd been keeping apart. He continued upstairs without waiting for her response. In their bedroom, a space that now felt contaminated with lies, Eric methodically packed clothing, toiletries, important documents, and irreplaceable personal items. He had no specific plan beyond removing himself from the immediate situation, but instinct told him this separation wouldn't be brief. When he returned downstairs with 2 suitcases and a duffel bag, Melissa was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice too low to make out specific words. She ended the call as he appeared in the doorway. "Kyle's coming over," she said, a hint of defiance in her tone. "I don't want to be alone right now." The statement was clearly designed to hurt him, to provoke a jealous reaction. Instead, Eric felt a strange sense of clarity. "That's your choice," he said simply. "I'll be staying at the residence inn on Westbrook Avenue for now. I've taken my essential documents and personal items. We can figure out the rest later." "Just like that? You're walking away? What exactly would you have me do, Melissa? Stay and watch while your affair partner comforts you over the exposure of your infidelity?" Eric shook his head. "I need time and space to think clearly. So do you, apparently. And if I want to try to work through this?" she asked, her tone suggesting this was a generous concession on her part. "Couples counseling, maybe?" Eric studied her face, searching for any sign of genuine remorse rather than merely regret at being caught. He found none. "Right now, I don't know what I want beyond distance," he admitted. "But I do know that any conversation about reconciliation would need to start with complete honesty. No more strategic omissions, no more carefully crafted narratives." Melissa's gaze dropped slightly, a subtle tell that confirmed what he already suspected. She wasn't prepared for that level of transparency. "I'll be in touch about practical matters," Eric said, lifting his bags. "My lawyer will contact you once I've had a chance to consult with them." "Lawyer? You're already talking to divorce attorneys?" Melissa's composure cracked slightly. "Don't you think you're rushing things?" "I haven't spoken to anyone yet," Eric clarified. "But I will be. And given everything that's happened, I think having professional representation is appropriate." As he loaded his car, Eric noticed Kyle's sedan turning onto their street. Rather than waiting to confront him, Eric pulled out of the driveway immediately, unwilling to create a scene that would only add drama to an already chaotic situation. In his rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of Kyle hurrying from his car toward the house, toward Melissa, with an expression of concern that appeared genuine even at a distance. The sight should have wounded him, Eric thought. Instead, it only confirmed that his decision to leave was the right one. The residence inn was utilitarian but comfortable, offering the anonymity and basic amenities he needed while figuring out next steps. After checking in and depositing his bags in the room, Eric finally allowed himself to check his phone. 17 missed calls from Melissa, 3 from unknown numbers, likely Kyle and perhaps others involved in the situation. 1 from Patricia Donnelly at HR. And, most surprisingly, a text from James Whitaker, Melissa's boss. "Eric, this is James from Meridian. While today's events were unfortunate and disruptive, I wanted to thank you for bringing certain matters to our attention. There are professional concerns beyond the personal that needed addressing. If you're willing, I'd appreciate a confidential conversation at your convenience." The message struck Eric as odd. What professional concerns beyond Melissa's personal behavior could be at issue? He recalled the folders he'd seen briefly: hotel receipts, meeting alibis, detailed documentation of fictional work events. Had those fabrications affected more than just their marriage? Before he could consider further, a new call came in, his friend Mark, whose name he'd been avoiding since the previous night. "Hey," Eric answered, suddenly exhausted. "Dude, what the hell is going on?" Mark's voice was pitched with concern. "Jen just called. She said something's happening with Melissa at work. Some kind of scandal?" Eric had forgotten that Mark's wife Jennifer worked in marketing at a company that occasionally partnered with Meridian. News would travel fast in professional circles. "It's complicated," Eric began, unsure how much to share. "Melissa and I are separating. There was an incident at her office today related to that." "Separating? Since when?" "We just had dinner with you guys 2 weeks ago. Since I discovered she's been having affairs for the past 3 years," Eric said flatly, the blunt statement feeling oddly liberating after the careful corporate language of the day's earlier conversations. A stunned silence followed. "Holy shit," Mark finally managed. Are you okay? Where are you? Do you need anything? The simple, direct concern, so different from the calculating responses he'd been navigating, broke something open in Eric. For the first time since discovering the folders, he found himself explaining the full situation to someone who was firmly in his corner, someone with no agenda beyond friendship. Mark listened without interruption, occasionally making sounds of disbelief or support as Eric detailed his discoveries, Melissa's reaction, and his impulsive decision to email the evidence to her work account. "That's intense," Mark said when Eric finished. "Not gonna lie, sending that email was nuclear. But after what you found? I get it, man. I really do. Was it too far?" Eric asked, voicing the doubt that had been lurking beneath his certainty. "Exposing her at work like that?" Mark considered the question seriously. "Look, in a perfect world, maybe you would have confronted her privately, then made calculated decisions about next steps. But we don't live in a perfect world. You had just discovered your entire marriage was built on elaborate lies. You reacted." The validation eased something in Eric's chest. "Yeah. What happens now?" Mark asked. "I don't know," Eric admitted. "I need to find a lawyer, figure out what divorce looks like, decide about the house." The practical considerations seemed overwhelming suddenly. "One step at a time," Mark advised. "And you're not alone, okay? Jen and I are here for whatever you need." After ending the call with promises to check in regularly, Eric finally allowed himself to fully process the day's events. In the span of 24 hours, his marriage had imploded, his wife's career had been jeopardized, and the carefully constructed life they'd built together had been revealed as partially fictional. Yet alongside the grief and anger, Eric recognized another emotion emerging, a kind of liberation. The crushing weight of unacknowledged suspicions, of doubts dismissed as paranoia, of instincts ignored in favor of trust, that burden had lifted. The truth, however painful, provided a solid foundation from which to rebuild. His phone buzzed with a new text from Melissa. "Kyle's gone. I think we should talk calmly about what happened today. About everything. Please come home so we can begin to sort this out." The message was reasonable, measured, exactly the tone Melissa adopted when attempting to manage a situation. Eric recognized the strategy from countless past disagreements: create a calm, rational environment where her superior communication skills could control the narrative. Not this time. He typed a brief response. "I need space and time. Any communication for now should go through our lawyers once they're established. I'll be in touch about practical matters as needed." Setting his phone aside, Eric opened his laptop and began researching divorce attorneys in their area. Whatever came next would be on his terms, guided by clear-eyed assessment rather than carefully managed manipulation. The hidden folder had revealed who Melissa really was. Now it was time to rediscover who Eric could be, without deception, without convenient fictions, without the subtle undermining of reality that had characterized his marriage for years. For the first time since the discovery, despite the pain and uncertainty, Eric felt something like hope. 3 days after leaving home, Eric sat across from Catherine Zhao, the divorce attorney recommended by his company's legal department. Her office projected understated competence, organized bookshelves, tasteful artwork, credentials displayed without ostentation. She had listened without interruption as Eric explained his situation, taking occasional notes while maintaining steady eye contact. "So that's where things stand," Eric concluded. "I'm currently at a hotel, she's at the house, and I've limited communication to practical matters only." Catherine nodded, setting her pen down. "Thank you for the thorough overview. Before we discuss legal strategy, I need to address the email you sent to your wife's workplace." Eric tensed slightly. "I realize that was impulsive." "Impulsive but potentially consequential," Catherine corrected. "From a purely legal standpoint, sharing private files from her computer could be problematic if she decides to pursue certain claims. However," she continued before Eric could respond, "the content of those files, evidence of systematic deception that affected her professional representations, creates a more complex situation. Her boss texted me," Eric mentioned, "said there were professional concerns beyond the personal that needed addressing. I haven't responded yet." "Interesting," Catherine made a note. "That suggests potential workplace policy violations beyond just the personal indiscretions. Has Meridian taken any disciplinary action against her that you're aware of?" "She's on 2 weeks personal leave, effective immediately." The HR director mentioned a review before determining next steps. Catherine tapped her pen thoughtfully. "That could work in our favor during proceedings. Not that we'd leverage her professional situation directly, but it establishes a pattern of deception that extended beyond your marriage." The conversation shifted to practical matters: financial documentation Eric needed to gather, temporary living arrangements, communication protocols. Catherine's approach was both compassionate and strategic, acknowledging the emotional aspects of the situation while focusing on pragmatic next steps. "What about the house?" Eric asked. "We own it jointly, both names on the mortgage. For now, maintain the status quo. She stays there while you're at the hotel. Once we file the petition, we can address temporary arrangements more formally. Given the circumstances, we have good grounds to argue for an equitable division of assets despite her infidelity." As the meeting concluded, Catherine offered one final observation. "Eric, I've handled hundreds of divorce cases. The ones that proceed most smoothly are those where both parties recognize when a relationship is truly beyond repair. Based on what you've shared, your wife's systematic deception over years suggests this isn't a single indiscretion that counseling might address, but a fundamental breach of the marital contract." The assessment aligned with Eric's own evolving perspective. The shock of discovery was gradually giving way to a clearer understanding that what he'd lost wasn't a healthy marriage but the illusion of one. "I think I knew that when I sent that email," Eric admitted. "Once I saw the extent of her double life, reconciliation was never really on the table." "Then we'll proceed accordingly," Catherine said, rising to escort him out. "My office will begin drafting the petition immediately. In the meantime, continue documenting everything, maintain minimal contact, and don't discuss details with mutual friends." Outside the lawyer's office, Eric checked his phone to find 3 missed calls, one from Mark, one from an unknown number, and most surprisingly, one from Patricia Donnelly at Meridian. There was also a text from Melissa. "Your silence is childish and counterproductive. We need to discuss financial matters immediately. The mortgage payment is due next week." The demanding tone contrasted sharply with her previous attempts at conciliation, suggesting her patience with his distance was waning. Following Catherine's advice about minimal communication, Eric responded only to the practical concern. "I've transferred my portion of the mortgage to our joint account. All scheduled bills will continue to be paid as usual while legal arrangements are determined." He then listened to his voicemails, starting with Mark's brief check-in, followed by the unknown caller who turned out to be James Whitaker from Meridian, reiterating his request for a conversation. Patricia Donnelly's message was more formal. "Mr. Mason, this is Patricia Donnelly from Meridian Consulting. I'm calling regarding some matters that have come to light during our review process. While I understand you're navigating a difficult personal situation, we would appreciate your assistance with certain information. Please call me at your earliest convenience." The corporate language couldn't disguise the underlying message. Meridian's investigation into Melissa's activities had raised questions that they believed Eric might help answer. His impulse was to ignore these requests. He had exposed Melissa's deception, but becoming further involved in her professional consequences felt potentially problematic. However, Catherine's observation about establishing patterns of deception gave him pause. If Melissa had used fabricated work emergencies and fictional business trips to cover her affairs, those lies might constitute more than personal betrayal. They could involve misuse of company resources, fraudulent expense reports, or other ethical violations that Meridian had legitimate interests in addressing. After brief consideration, Eric called Patricia back, reaching her voicemail. He left a message agreeing to speak with her but noting that he would need to consult with his attorney about any formal statements or documentation. His next call was to James Whitaker, who answered immediately. "Eric, thank you for returning my call," James began, his tone professional but urgent. "I appreciate this is a difficult time for you personally. What can I help you with?" Eric asked, preferring directness over platitudes. "The materials included in your email contain some concerning information about client interactions and expense allocations," James explained carefully. "We're conducting an internal review, and your perspective would be valuable in understanding certain discrepancies." "Discrepancies," Eric repeated. "You mean the fictional business trips and meetings she used as cover stories?" "Among other things, yes." James's voice lowered slightly. "Some of the documentation suggests potential misrepresentation to clients and improper use of company resources. I'd prefer not to discuss specifics over the phone." Eric considered his response, remembering Catherine's cautionary advice. "I understand your concerns, but I'm in the middle of divorce proceedings. Any formal statement would need to be coordinated through my attorney." "Of course," James agreed quickly. "This wouldn't be a formal deposition, just a conversation to help us determine the scope of our internal investigation. But having your attorney present is certainly appropriate." They arranged a tentative meeting for later in the week, subject to Catherine's availability and approval. As Eric ended the call, he realized that the consequences of his impulsive email were expanding beyond what he'd initially imagined. What had begun as a personal revelation was evolving into a professional investigation with potential career-ending implications for Melissa. The realization brought a complex mix of emotions. While he hadn't intended to destroy her career, he couldn't summon much sympathy given the deliberate, sustained nature of her deceptions. The meticulous documentation of her affairs, the very evidence now causing her professional problems, illustrated a level of calculated betrayal that was difficult to forgive. Later that evening, as Eric was reviewing financial documents Catherine had requested, his phone displayed an incoming call from Melissa. After brief hesitation, he answered, the first direct contact since leaving the house days earlier. "Hello," he said, his tone neutral. Finally, Melissa responded, frustration evident in her voice. "I was beginning to think you'd blocked my number along with everything else." "I'm focusing on practical matters right now," Eric replied. "What do you need?" "What do I need?" she repeated incredulously. "I need my husband to act like an adult instead of hiding in a hotel sending inflammatory emails to my workplace. I need a chance to explain my side of this situation without lawyers and HR directors involved." "You had that chance," Eric pointed out. "The night I found the folders. Your explanation was that you were meeting needs outside our marriage while keeping things separate." "That was the first shock of being discovered," Melissa countered. "Of course I didn't express myself perfectly. If you'd give me a proper opportunity to explain." "Explain what, exactly?" Eric interrupted, frustration breaking through his composed facade. "Explain how you maintained dating profiles under altered names? Explain the detailed alibi documents you created? Explain the hotel receipts and messages with multiple men over several years?" "It wasn't what you think," Melissa insisted. "The situation is more complicated." "No, it really isn't," Eric cut in again. "The only complicated part was the elaborate system you created to maintain multiple relationships simultaneously without anyone discovering the truth. The underlying reality is actually quite simple. You repeatedly broke our marriage vows while lying to my face about it." Silence followed his assessment. When Melissa spoke again, her tone had shifted to something colder, more strategic. "Fine. If that's your position, we can let the lawyers handle everything. But I hope you realize what you've done by involving my workplace in our marital problems." "What I've done?" Eric couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "I sent an email with files you created, documents you wrote, messages you sent. If those materials are causing problems at Meridian, it's because of your actions, not mine. You had no right." "I had every right to react to discovering my entire marriage was based on systematic deception," Eric interrupted firmly. "You're not the victim here, Melissa, no matter how desperately you want to frame yourself that way." Another silence stretched between them, this one heavier with unspoken accusations. "Meridian has suspended my company accounts," Melissa finally said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They're conducting a full audit of my expense reports and client interactions for the past 3 years. James Whitaker has temporarily taken over all my accounts. Do you understand what that means for my career?" The question seemed genuine rather than merely rhetorical, as if she truly expected Eric to prioritize her professional concerns over his own emotional devastation. "I understand perfectly," he replied evenly. "It means the consequences of your decisions are extending beyond our marriage. That's how consequences work, Melissa. They don't stay neatly contained in the boxes you've created." "This is vindictive," she accused. "You're punishing me professionally because you're hurt personally." "No," Eric corrected. "I'm refusing to maintain the artificial separation between your various lives that enabled your deception in the first place. The person who sent romantic messages to Kyle and Greg and whoever else is the same person who presented to clients and submitted expense reports. If those aspects of your life are now colliding, that's the result of your choices, not mine." The conversation continued in this vein, Melissa alternating between attempts to elicit sympathy and thinly veiled accusations, Eric maintaining firm boundaries while refusing to accept responsibility for consequences that stemmed directly from her actions. Eventually, Melissa shifted tactics. "Kyle thinks I should file a police report about you accessing my private files and sharing them without permission. It could be considered a form of cyber harassment." The transparent attempt at intimidation confirmed Eric's decision to maintain distance from his wife. "You're welcome to file whatever reports you think appropriate. My attorney will be interested in the legal discovery process that would follow, given the content of those files." "Your attorney," Melissa repeated flatly. "So we're really doing this? Divorce, lawyers, the whole adversarial process." "You created an adversarial situation years ago," Eric pointed out. You just didn't inform me I was participating. After the call ended, Eric felt emotionally drained but oddly clearer about his path forward. The conversation had confirmed what he'd been gradually accepting: reconciliation was not merely unlikely but fundamentally impossible. The woman he'd spoken to bore little resemblance to the partner he believed he had. Her priorities, perspectives, and moral framework were simply incompatible with his own. The meeting with James Whittaker and Patricia Donnelly took place 2 days later at Catherine Zhao's office. The arrangement, suggested by Catherine, positioned the conversation as an informal exchange of information rather than an official statement. "We appreciate your willingness to meet, Mr. Mason," Patricia began after introductions were complete. "As I mentioned on the phone, certain aspects of the materials you forwarded have raised concerns that go beyond personal matters," Catherine interjected smoothly. "Before we proceed, I want to clarify that my client is here voluntarily to provide context for materials that were already in Meridian's possession. This is not a formal deposition or statement." "Understood completely," James agreed. "We're not seeking to involve Mr. Mason in our internal processes beyond this informational conversation." What followed was a carefully structured discussion about specific documents from Melissa's hidden folders. Patricia asked methodical questions about timestamps, locations, and events mentioned in the alibi documents, while James occasionally added context about corresponding client meetings or company functions. "So to confirm," Patricia said at one point, displaying a document from her tablet, "this detailed account of a client dinner in Chicago on October 17 last year, you had no knowledge of this event?" "None," Eric confirmed. "Melissa told me she was attending a marketing conference. I now understand she was actually with someone named Greg during that period." James and Patricia exchanged glances. "The concern," James explained, "is that expense reports were submitted for this supposed client dinner. Meridian reimbursed several $100s for a meal that apparently never occurred with people who were never there. The pattern repeated with multiple events: fabricated client meetings, non-existent conference participation, fictional business emergencies, all meticulously documented in Melissa's alibi files and apparently corresponding to company expenses or resources. Based on our preliminary review," Patricia said as the meeting concluded, "these discrepancies appear systematic rather than isolated. We're still determining the full financial impact, but the company's position is that these constitute serious violations of our ethics policies and potentially fraudulent misuse of resources." "What happens next?" Eric asked, curious despite his desire to distance himself from Melissa's professional problems. Patricia's expression remained professionally neutral. "Our internal process will continue. Ms. Mason remains on leave pending completion of our review, at which point appropriate action will be determined according to company policy." As James and Patricia gathered their materials to leave, James paused, addressing Eric directly. "Off the record, I want to apologize for any role Meridian may have inadvertently played in facilitating this situation you experienced. Had we known company resources were being misused in this manner, we would have addressed it immediately." The unexpected acknowledgement caught Eric by surprise. "Thank you," he replied simply, recognizing the genuine sentiment behind the corporate language. After they departed, Catherine turned to Eric with an evaluative expression. "That went as well as could be expected. Their investigation clearly supports the narrative that your wife's deceptions were calculated and extended into her professional conduct. That may be relevant if she attempts to portray your actions as disproportionate or vindictive. Will it affect the divorce proceedings?" Eric asked. "Potentially," Catherine acknowledged. "If she loses her position or faces professional sanctions, it could impact financial considerations. More importantly, though, it establishes a pattern of behavior that contradicts any attempt to characterize her affairs as minor indiscretions or your discovery as an invasion of privacy." 2 days later, Eric received an unexpected visitor at his hotel, Kyle Brennan, the man who had called him from Melissa's office and apparently followed them home afterward. The front desk called to inform Eric that someone was asking for him in the lobby. Curiosity overcame caution as Eric took the elevator down, finding Kyle waiting near the reception area, younger than Eric had expected, early 30s perhaps, with the polished appearance of someone accustomed to making good first impressions. "Mr. Mason," Kyle began, extending his hand automatically before seeming to think better of it and withdrawing the gesture. "Thank you for coming down. I thought we should talk." "About what, exactly?" Eric kept his distance, maintaining a neutral expression despite the surreal nature of coming face to face with one of his wife's affair partners. "About Melissa," Kyle replied predictably. "About the situation at Meridian." about potential resolutions that might benefit everyone involved. The carefully chosen phrasing immediately put Eric on alert. Resolutions, he repeated. You mean you're here to negotiate on Melissa's behalf? Kyle glanced around the lobby. Perhaps we could speak somewhere more private? I don't think so, Eric replied firmly. Whatever you have to say, you can say here briefly, or through our respective attorneys. Frustration flashed across Kyle's face before he regained his composed demeanor. Look, I understand you're angry. You have every right to be. But what's happening at Meridian goes beyond reasonable consequences. Melissa is facing potential termination and even legal action over expense reports. Fraudulent expense reports, Eric corrected. For events that never happened because she was actually with you or other men instead of working. Kyle had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. The point is, there might be ways to mitigate this situation that would benefit everyone. If you were to clarify to Meridian that some of those events might have been legitimate business. Stop, Eric interrupted, incredulous. Are you actually asking me to lie to her employers to help cover up her fraudulent activities? Not lie, Kyle backpedaled quickly. Just perhaps suggest that some details might have been misunderstood or taken out of context. The audacity of the request left Eric momentarily speechless. When he found his voice, it carried an edge of disbelief. You conducted an affair with my wife for, how long exactly? And now you're approaching me in my hotel lobby to suggest I help conceal evidence of her professional misconduct? Kyle's expression hardened slightly. Melissa is going through hell right now. Her career is imploding, her marriage is over, her reputation is in tatters. All because you chose the most destructive possible response to a personal situation. All because she systematically lied and cheated for years, Eric corrected firmly. The consequences she's facing are direct results of her own actions, not my response to discovering them. She made mistakes, Kyle conceded, changing tactics. Serious ones. But destroying her professional life won't undo those mistakes or make you feel better in the long run. Eric studied the man before him, wondering what combination of genuine concern and self-interest motivated this intervention. Was Kyle truly worried about Melissa, or more concerned about his own potential exposure as investigations continued? I appreciate your concern, Eric said finally, his tone making clear he felt the opposite. But any discussions about Melissa's professional situation should go through appropriate channels, her attorney, Meridian's HR department, or relevant regulatory authorities if it comes to that. This could have been handled privately, Kyle pressed, making one last attempt. Between you and Melissa, without involving her workplace or creating public humiliation. Privacy, Eric observed, was the condition that enabled her deception in the first place. The carefully maintained separation between her various lives created the space for lies to flourish. I'm not interested in perpetuating that system. With that, Eric turned and walked back toward the elevators, leaving Kyle standing in the lobby. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of the other man's expression, a mixture of frustration and calculation that suggested this wouldn't be the last attempt to manage the expanding consequences of Melissa's exposed deceptions. Later that evening, Eric received a text from an unknown number. This is Kyle. Whatever you think of me or Melissa, consider this, the consequences she's facing are disproportionate to any harm caused. Professional destruction won't heal your personal wounds. If you ever want to discuss reasonable resolutions, I'm willing to mediate. The presumption of the message, that Kyle had any standing to mediate or determine what constituted reasonable resolutions, would have been laughable if it weren't so galling. Eric blocked the number without responding, then forwarded the message to Catherine as documentation of continued contact attempts. Her response came quickly, "Thank you for the update. This demonstrates ongoing coordination between your wife and her affair partner, which may be relevant if claims arise about privacy violations or proportionate responses. Continue documenting but do not engage directly." 3 days later, Eric's legal team filed the initial divorce petition. Catherine had advised moving quickly given the volatile situation, establishing formal legal parameters for the separation before Melissa could potentially make counterclaims about Eric's actions in discovering and revealing her infidelity. The petition cited irreconcilable differences rather than adultery as the primary grounds, a strategic decision Catherine had explained. While adultery is clearly established, focusing on it can create unnecessarily adversarial proceedings. The irreconcilable differences approach gives us flexibility to introduce the infidelity where relevant without making it the central legal issue. The same day the petition was filed, Eric received an email from Patricia Donnelly. "Dear Mr. Mason, I'm writing to inform you that following our comprehensive review, Meridian Consulting has terminated Melissa Mason's employment, effective immediately. This decision was based on multiple documented violations of company policies regarding expense reporting, client interactions, and ethical standards. While I cannot share specific details due to confidentiality requirements, I wanted you to be aware of this development given your assistance in our review process. Should Meridian's investigation result in any legal proceedings that might require your testimony or documentation, our legal department will contact you directly. Regards, Patricia Donnelly, Director of Human Resources, Meridian Consulting Group. The news of Melissa's termination brought Eric no satisfaction, only a weary recognition that the consequences of her deception were continuing to unfold. What had begun with his accidental discovery of a hidden folder had expanded into the complete dismantling of the life Melissa had constructed, her marriage, her career, and apparently her carefully managed public persona all collapsing simultaneously. That evening, as Eric reviewed additional financial documents for Catherine, his phone rang displaying Melissa's number. Despite his better judgment, he answered. "Are you satisfied now?" Melissa's voice was raw with emotion, the polished control of their previous conversations replaced by undisguised anger. "I've been fired. After 8 years with Meridian, they terminated me without severance because of your vindictive email. Because of your fraudulent expense reports and misuse of company resources," Eric corrected automatically, though without satisfaction. "Actions you documented yourself in those alibi files. They're pursuing legal action, Eric. Potential fraud charges. Do you understand what that would mean? Criminal proceedings, not just professional consequences." The escalation was unexpected. "I'm sorry to hear that," Eric said, and meant it despite everything. The prospect of his wife facing criminal charges, however deserved based on her actions, carried a weight beyond the professional and marital realms. "Sorry?" Melissa's laugh held no humor. "You caused this. You took private files and forwarded them to my workplace with the explicit intention of destroying my career alongside our marriage." "That's not accurate," Eric replied, maintaining his composure. "I acted impulsively after discovering years of systematic deception. The consequences you're facing stem from your own documented actions, not my response to them." The conversation continued in this vein, Melissa attempting to position Eric as the primary villain in her professional downfall, Eric consistently redirecting responsibility to her original deceptions and documented misconduct. "I've retained a criminal defense attorney," Melissa finally said, her voice regaining some of its controlled quality. "He believes I have grounds to file charges against you for unauthorized access and distribution of private files." "That would be inadvisable," Eric responded, remembering Catherine's guidance about such threats. "My attorney would welcome the opportunity to depose you regarding the content of those files during discovery." The implied counterthreat hung between them. Any legal action Melissa initiated would only further expose the detailed evidence of her affairs and professional misconduct. After a tense silence, Melissa's tone shifted yet again, anger giving way to something that might have been genuine vulnerability if not for the context of their conversation. "How did we get here?" she asked, her voice quieter. 8 years together, and it ends with lawyers and termination notices and criminal defense strategies. The question seemed to seek a shared narrative, one where they were both participants in a mutual breakdown rather than one person discovering another's extended deception. "We got here," Eric replied carefully, "because you made specific choices over a period of years. Choices to betray our marriage vows, to create elaborate documentation of those betrayals, and to misuse company resources in the process. I discovered those choices accidentally, and then made my own choice about how to respond. A choice designed to cause maximum damage," Melissa observed bitterly. "A choice that connected worlds you had deliberately kept separate," Eric corrected. "The damage resulted from the collision of those worlds, not from my action in connecting them." After ending the call, Eric sat motionless in his hotel room, absorbing the latest developments. The situation had escalated beyond what he could have imagined that Sunday afternoon when he'd innocently asked to use Melissa's laptop to print a document. What had begun as a personal discovery was now expanding into potential criminal proceedings, with ripple effects touching multiple lives beyond just their marriage. Yet despite the chaos and pain, Eric recognized something emerging from the wreckage, a clarity about himself and his boundaries that had been missing during his years with Melissa. The man who had trusted blindly, who had defended his wife against other suspicions, who had accepted increasingly implausible explanations, that version of Eric was gone, replaced by someone more discerning, more willing to acknowledge uncomfortable truths. He had found a hidden folder on his wife's laptop, and in doing so, had revealed who she really was, not just to her workplace and social circle, but most importantly, to himself. Whatever came next would be built on that fundamental truth, however painful its discovery had been. 6 months after discovering the hidden folder, Eric sat in Catherine Zhao's office reviewing the final draft of the divorce settlement. The document represented weeks of negotiation, dozens of hours with financial analysts, and a process that had proven surprisingly less contentious than initially feared. Once their criminal investigation began, Melissa's position shifted dramatically, Catherine observed, referencing Meridian's decision to pursue charges related to the fraudulent expense reports. Her priority became minimizing legal exposure rather than maximizing financial gain from the divorce. Eric nodded, examining the terms that would officially conclude his marriage. The agreement included an equitable division of assets, sale of their shared home with proceeds split equally, and clean separation of retirement accounts. No alimony for either party, no lingering financial entanglements. It's fair, he acknowledged. More than fair, considering the circumstances. Her legal team recognized that pursuing aggressive financial claims would only invite more detailed examination of her documented misconduct, Catherine explained. This settlement allows her to focus resources on her criminal defense rather than a protracted divorce battle. According to Catherine's sources, Meridian's investigation had uncovered approximately $42,000 in fraudulent expense claims over 3 years, meals with clients who were never contacted, conference registrations for events never attended, hotel upgrades for business trips that were actually personal rendezvous. The company had filed charges for wire fraud and falsification of business records, with potential federal implications due to some interstate elements. Will she serve time? Eric asked, the question emerging despite his attempts to emotionally distance himself from Melissa's legal problems. Impossible to predict with certainty, Catherine replied. First-time offenders with good legal representation often negotiate plea agreements involving probation, restitution, and community service rather than incarceration. But there are no guarantees, especially with corporate fraud cases where prosecutors often seek to make examples. Eric signed the settlement documents mechanically, each signature representing another step toward formal conclusion of his marriage. The process felt strangely anticlimactic. The emotional devastation had occurred months earlier with the discovery of Melissa's hidden life. This legal ceremony was merely bureaucratic confirmation of what had already ended. Once filed, we should have the final decree within 30 to 45 days, Catherine explained, gathering the signed documents. Given the circumstances, I don't anticipate any unexpected delays. As Eric prepared to leave, Catherine offered a final observation. You've handled this situation with remarkable composure, Eric. Many clients in similar positions become consumed by vindictiveness or self-destruction. Your focus on moving forward rather than punishing has served you well. The assessment surprised him. I sent that email to her workplace, he reminded Catherine. That wasn't exactly taking the high road. An impulsive reaction in the immediate aftermath of devastating discovery is understandable, Catherine countered. What matters more is how you've conducted yourself since then, maintaining appropriate boundaries, focusing on fair resolution rather than retribution, declining to publicly disparage her despite ample justification. Eric considered this perspective as he drove from the law office to his new apartment, a modern one-bedroom in a downtown building, selected specifically for its complete dissimilarity to the suburban home he'd shared with Melissa. Perhaps Catherine was right. After that initial reactive email, he had navigated the dissolution of his marriage with unexpected steadiness. The apartment represented his first significant step toward rebuilding. The furniture was new, selected according to his preferences rather than compromised choices. The space reflected his personality in ways the shared home never had, despite his years living there. There were no memories of Melissa embedded in these walls, no echoes of conversations or shared moments. As he settled in that evening, Eric's phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Settlement signed? Divorce drink still on for tomorrow? Eric confirmed both questions, appreciating his friend's consistent support throughout the process. Mark and Jennifer had remained firmly in Eric's corner, offering practical help and emotional solidarity without engaging in excessive Melissa bashing or toxic commiseration. The following evening, as promised, Mark met Eric at a quiet bar downtown, not for dramatic intoxication or celebration of his divorce, but for simple acknowledgement of a significant transition alongside someone who understood its weight. To endings and beginnings, Mark offered, raising his glass. And to clarity, Eric added, however painful its arrival. They drank in companionable silence for a moment before Mark asked, "Heard anything about Melissa's criminal case?" Eric shook his head. "Nothing directly. Catherine mentioned possible plea negotiations, but I'm deliberately maintaining distance from that situation." "Probably wise," Mark agreed. "Though I admit I'm curious how someone justifies submitting fake expense reports to cover affairs for years. The psychological gymnastics involved." "It's about compartmentalization," Eric replied, the insight emerging from months of therapy and reflection. Melissa created distinct worlds that never intersected: her marriage, her affairs, her professional persona. In her mind, they were separate realities with different rules and boundaries. "Until you connected them with that email," Mark observed. "Until reality caught up," Eric corrected. "My email was just the mechanism." They shifted to other topics: Mark's recent promotion, an upcoming concert, Eric's tentative return to dating after 6 months of intentional solitude. The conversation flowed easily, unmarked by the awkwardness that sometimes characterized interactions with other friends who seemed uncertain how to address his divorce. As they prepared to leave, Mark offered one final observation. "You seem good, man. Not just coping, but actually recalibrated somehow. Like you found solid ground." The assessment resonated with Eric's own internal experience. "I have," he acknowledged. "Though the path there wasn't one I would have chosen." "Sometimes we don't choose our most important journeys," Mark replied with unexpected wisdom. "They choose us." 3 weeks later, Eric received a text message from an unknown number. "This is Kyle Brennan. Before you block this number, please know that Melissa and I are no longer in contact. I'm reaching out because there's information you should have that might provide context for some of what happened." Eric's immediate instinct was to delete the message and block the number as suggested. His life had stabilized, he had no interest in reopening wounds that were finally healing. Yet something, curiosity, perhaps, or the lingering need for complete understanding, made him hesitate. After consulting with his therapist, Dr. Reed, Eric decided to respond with clear boundaries. "I'm not interested in revisiting the past or engaging in extended communication. If you have specific factual information you believe I should know, you can share it in a single message. I make no promises about my response." Kyle's reply came quickly. "Fair enough. 3 points. 1. Melissa maintained multiple simultaneous relationships for years before your marriage. This was a pattern, not a new development. 2. The story version's documents were initially her idea, but I encouraged their elaboration as they seemed to excite her. 3. I recently discovered she used my credit card information for personal purchases without permission. I believe she may have financial issues beyond what was revealed in your divorce proceedings." The message created a strange cognitive dissonance, confirmation of Melissa's deceptive nature alongside the uncomfortable realization that he was now receiving information from someone who had participated in destroying his marriage. After careful consideration, Eric responded simply, "Thank you for the information. I won't be engaging further." He then blocked the number, maintaining the boundary he had established. Whatever Kyle's motivation for sharing those details, genuine contrition, desire for absolution, or simply revenge against Melissa for some perceived wrong, Eric had no interest in becoming entangled in their dynamic. The information about Melissa's pattern predating their marriage wasn't entirely surprising. In retrospect, there had been signs he'd missed or dismissed. The revelation about potential financial issues beyond the exposed expense fraud was potentially more significant, suggesting the full scope of her deception might extend even further than discovered. Rather than dwelling on these possibilities, Eric forwarded Kyle's message to Catherine with a brief note explaining its source and context, then deliberately redirected his attention to the evening's plans: dinner with Alicia, a graphic designer he'd met through a mutual professional connection. Their relationship was progressing slowly but steadily, built on deliberate communication and gradual trust building rather than rushed intimacy. Alicia knew about Eric's divorce in general terms but not the specific details, information he would share if their connection continued to develop, but not as the defining narrative of his identity. As he prepared for their dinner, Eric reflected on how differently he approached relationships now. The experience with Melissa had fundamentally changed his understanding of trust, not eliminating his capacity for it, as he had initially feared, but transforming it from blind faith into something more discerning and intentional. The final divorce decree arrived on a Tuesday morning, 41 days after signing the settlement. The official document was surprisingly brief given the complexity of emotions and events it represented, just a few pages of legal language dissolving the contract of marriage between Eric Mason and Melissa Winters Mason. Eric studied the document carefully before filing it away, acknowledging both its finality and its limitations. The legal severance was complete, but the emotional process of fully integrating the experience continued. Dr. Reed had helped him understand that healing wasn't a destination but an ongoing journey, one that wouldn't erase the betrayal but would gradually incorporate it into his life narrative without allowing it to dominate. That evening, Eric attended a technology networking event downtown, his first professional gathering since the divorce became final. As he exchanged business cards and discussed industry trends, he was approached by a woman whose name badge identified her as Rebecca Lowell, CEO of Venture Solutions. "Eric Mason," she said, extending her hand. "I've been hoping to connect with you." "Rebecca," he acknowledged, shaking her hand. "I'm familiar with Venture's work in the financial services sector. Impressive integration solutions." She smiled, apparently pleased by his recognition. "Thank you. Actually, I wanted to speak with you about a potential opportunity. My company is expanding our project management division, and your name has come up in several professional contexts." The conversation shifted to specific technical challenges and Eric's experience addressing similar issues in his current role. Only as they exchanged contact information for a more formal discussion did Rebecca add, almost casually, "I should mention, we occasionally partner with Meridian Consulting on certain projects. I understand there's some history there that might be relevant." The reference caught Eric by surprise. "You're aware of my personal connection to Meridian?" Rebecca's expression was professionally neutral but not unkind. "The business community in this city is relatively small, especially in our sector. Without delving into specifics, I'm aware there was a situation involving your former spouse. I wanted to acknowledge it transparently rather than pretending ignorance." Eric appreciated the direct approach. "Thank you for that. To be clear, my issue was with specific actions by one individual, not with Meridian as a company. I maintain professional relationships with several people there." "That's exactly what James Whittaker said when I asked him about the potential conflict," Rebecca confirmed. "He spoke quite highly of your handling of a difficult situation." In fact, the conversation concluded with plans for a formal interview the following week. As Eric drove home, he reflected on this unexpected intersection of his personal history and professional opportunity. The email he'd impulsively sent 6 months earlier, the one that had connected Melissa's carefully separated worlds, had created ripple effects that continued to influence his life in unanticipated ways. Rather than attempting to compartmentalize like Melissa had, Eric had chosen integration, acknowledging the painful experience while refusing to let it define him professionally or personally. That approach appeared to be recognized and valued by people like James Whittaker and Rebecca Lowell, who operated with similar transparency. 2 days before his scheduled interview with Venture Solutions, Eric received an email from James Whittaker. "Eric, Rebecca Lowell mentioned your upcoming conversation with Venture Solutions. While I typically don't provide unsolicited recommendations, I wanted you to know that I've shared my positive professional assessment with Rebecca directly. Meridian has undergone significant internal changes since the situation with Melissa. I believe we're a stronger organization for having addressed the issues that came to light, however difficult that process was initially. If our paths cross professionally in the future, I would welcome the opportunity to collaborate. Good leaders recognize the difference between personal circumstances and professional capabilities. Regards, James Whittaker SVP, Client Services Meridian Consulting Group." The message represented another unexpected outcome of the email that had exposed Melissa's hidden life, a professional connection established through unusual circumstances but potentially valuable in its own right. The interview with Venture Solutions went exceptionally well, resulting in an offer that represented both professional advancement and significant financial improvement. After careful consideration and negotiation of terms, Eric accepted the position, giving notice to his current employer with appropriate appreciation for their support during his personal challenges. 3 weeks before starting his new role, Eric received a call from Catherine Zhao. "I have information you should be aware of," she began without preamble. "Melissa has accepted a plea agreement in the criminal case." Eric had deliberately avoided seeking updates on Melissa's legal situation, preferring to focus on his own path forward. "I appreciate you letting me know. What are the terms?" 18 months probation, full restitution to Meridian, 200 hours community service, and a permanent record of the felony conviction, Catherine detailed. "No incarceration, but significant professional consequences given the nature of the offense." "I see," Eric replied, processing this information without strong emotional response. "Thank you for updating me. There's one more thing," Catherine added. Part of the plea agreement included a forensic examination of her financial records. They discovered evidence suggesting some of your joint accounts may have been accessed inappropriately during your marriage for purposes beyond the Meridian fraud. This caught Eric's attention more directly. Meaning what, exactly? Potentially unauthorized transfers from joint accounts to personal accounts you weren't aware of, Catherine explained. Nothing that would affect your divorce settlement at this stage, but I thought you should know for future financial security purposes. The revelation aligned with Kyle's cryptic message about Melissa's potential financial issues. Rather than reopening emotional wounds, however, the information merely confirmed Eric's growing understanding of how completely Melissa's deception had permeated their marriage. I've already established completely new accounts and monitoring, Eric assured Catherine, but I appreciate the heads up. After ending the call, Eric sat on his apartment balcony, watching the city lights emerge as evening settled. News of Melissa's plea agreement produced neither satisfaction nor distress, just a muted acknowledgement of appropriate consequences for documented actions. The woman he had married, or rather, the version of her he had believed existed, had never been real. The person revealed through the hidden folder, subsequent investigations, and legal proceedings was someone fundamentally different from the partner he had trusted for 8 years. That painful truth had been established months ago. Today's news merely added another data point to an already complete picture. His phone buzzed with a text from Alicia. Still on for dinner tomorrow? I found a new Thai place with amazing reviews. The simple message, ordinary and unmarked by deception, represented the direction Eric had chosen for his life. Forward movement built on transparent communication and genuine connection rather than backward focus on betrayal. Absolutely, he replied, looking forward to it. 2 months into his new position at Venture Solutions, Eric received an unexpected email from an unfamiliar address. Eric, you don't know me, but my name is Teresa Winters. I'm Melissa's younger sister. I've debated contacting you for months, unsure if it would be welcome or appropriate given the circumstances of your divorce. I want you to know that our family understands the situation was entirely of Melissa's making. Her actions reflected patterns we've observed throughout her life but failed to address effectively. While that doesn't excuse her behavior or mitigate your experience, I hope it might provide some context. Melissa is now in therapy addressing long-standing issues related to identity, truth-telling, and relationship patterns. The legal consequences she's facing have forced confrontation with realities she's avoided for decades. I'm not contacting you seeking reconciliation or forgiveness. Those aren't reasonable expectations given what occurred. I simply wanted you to know that some of us recognize the true nature of what happened and the unfair burden you carried as a result. If this message is unwelcome, please disregard it with my apologies for the intrusion. Sincerely, Teresa. The email was unexpected but oddly validating, external confirmation of his perceptions from someone who had known Melissa her entire life. After careful consideration, Eric composed a brief, measured response. Teresa, thank you for your message. While the situation with Melissa was obviously painful, I focused on moving forward rather than dwelling on past betrayals. I appreciate your acknowledgement and wish your family well as you navigate these difficult circumstances. Eric. The exchange represented another step in the ongoing process of integration, absorbing the experience of betrayal into his life narrative without allowing it to define his identity or future relationships. Dr. Reed had described this as metabolizing trauma, the gradual transformation of painful experience into wisdom rather than ongoing injury. 1 year to the day after discovering the hidden folder on Melissa's laptop, Eric met Alicia for dinner at the restaurant where they'd had their first date. Their relationship had developed steadily over the intervening months, built on mutual respect, transparent communication, and gradual trust building. Anniversary dinner? Alicia asked with a smile as they were seated. Of sorts, Eric acknowledged. Though not the conventional kind. He had shared the full story of his marriage and its ending with Alicia 3 months into their relationship, recognizing that genuine connection required honesty about significant life experiences. She had listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions and expressing appropriate empathy without the excessive validation or dramatic reactions others sometimes offered. The discovery anniversary, she noted, understanding immediately. How does it feel a year later? Different than I would have expected, Eric admitted. Less like commemorating a wound and more like acknowledging a turning point. The pain has diminished, but the clarity remains. Alicia studied him thoughtfully. Do you ever regret sending that email? Connecting worlds that she had kept separate? The question was one Eric had reflected on extensively during therapy sessions. No, he said after a moment's consideration. Not the act itself, though perhaps the impulsive timing. If I had taken even a day to process before responding, I might have approached it differently, but the fundamental decision to stop maintaining artificial separations between her various lives was the right one. Because it was honest, Alicia suggested. Because it was necessary, Eric clarified. For my own integrity if nothing else. Continuing to protect her compartmentalized deceptions would have required becoming complicit in them. They shifted to other topics as the meal progressed: Alicia's upcoming art installation, Eric's new project adventure, plans for a weekend hiking trip. The conversation flowed naturally, unmarked by the guardedness that had characterized the final years of his marriage to Melissa. Later that evening, as they walked through the downtown park near Eric's apartment, Alicia returned to their earlier discussion. You know what strikes me about your experience, she observed. Not just the betrayal itself, but how it revealed something essential about different approaches to integrity. How so? Eric asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Melissa created separate worlds with different rules, appearing to be one person while actually being another. When those worlds collided, everything collapsed because none of them was fully authentic, Alicia explained. Whereas you've chosen integration, acknowledging difficult experiences while incorporating them into a coherent whole rather than compartmentalizing them away. The insight resonated deeply with Eric's own evolving understanding. That's exactly what happened, he agreed. And what continues to happen, really. The integration is an ongoing process. For all of us, Alicia noted. Just with different levels of awareness and intention. As they continued their walk, Eric reflected on the journey of the past year. From accidental discovery through devastating revelation to gradual rebuilding. The experience had transformed him, not by making him cynical or mistrustful as he had initially feared, but by developing more discerning wisdom about relationships, boundaries, and authenticity. He had found a hidden folder on his wife's laptop, revealing who she really was. But perhaps more importantly, the process had revealed who he really was, someone capable of facing painful truths, maintaining integrity during crisis, and building a new life grounded in authentic connection rather than convenient fiction. That revelation, painful though its catalyst had been, represented a gift he would not have chosen but now wouldn't trade away. The clarity it provided illuminated not just the past but the path forward, a path he continued to walk with increasing confidence, one intentional step at a time.